My name is Keanu. Even and saying that now feels uncomfortable because there are names the world knows and silences no one has ever touched. But you, whoever you are, wherever you are tonight, I need to speak to you as if you are already standing somewhere inside the room with me. There is a reason I have to tell you this, and it begins with the part of my life that looked full while feeling unbearably empty. I wasn't sitting by a window when it happened. Nothing dramatic. No shouting. No door slammed hard enough to wake the dead. Just a small room, there's late light folding itself over the floor, and my own reflection looking back at me like a stranger who had borrowed my face for too many years. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with that low, patient sound it makes when it knows more than you do. I had built a life people could point at. Work, roads, hotels, rooms with clean sheets and no memory. Stages, cameras, hands reaching. Voices saying my name like it belonged to them. And for a long time, I let that be enough because the alternative was admitting how cold the quiet became afterward. I learned how to leave before being left. I learned how to smile without giving away the ache behind my teeth. I learned how to answer questions without saying the one thing that followed me everywhere. I was afraid I would grow old and vanish behind all the things people thought they knew about me. Maybe that sounds strange to you. Maybe you would look at me with those calm eyes I have imagined too many times and say, but you were seen. And I would have to lower my gaze because, yes, I was seen in the way a window is seen from the street. People notice the light. They do not know what waits in the room. There were evenings when I came home and did not turn on the lamps right away. I would stand in the dark with my coat still on, listening to the building breathe. Sometimes I could hear a couple laughing through a wall, a child running somewhere above me, water moving through pipes like distant rain. Ordinary sounds, sacred sounds, the kind of sounds a man does not realize he has been starving for until they belong to someone else. I used to tell myself I was not lonely. I called it solitude. I called it discipline. I called it peace. Men like me become very skilled at giving noble names to wounds we refuse to touch. But that night by the window, I stopped pretending. I realized I had not been waiting for success or rest or even forgiveness. I had been waiting for a person I could be quiet with and still feel known, not admired, not explained. not turned into a story before I had finished breathing. Known. And when I admitted that, something shifted. The room did not become warmer. The years did not come back. The old losses did not loosen their grip. But there was a small space inside me where honesty entered. And it hurt like air entering a house that had been sealed too long. I thought of you then. Not your face, because I do not know it. Not your name, because maybe life has kept it hidden from me for reasons I am too tired to understand. I thought of your hands around a cup in the morning. I thought of the way you might pause before answering, as if words mattered. I thought of walking beside you without needing to fill the silence, our shoulders close enough to remember that bodies can be homes. Then I doubted it. Of course I did. A man who has spent enough years alone begins to distrust hope. He looks at tenderness and wonders what it will cost. He looks at love and hears the footsteps of grief behind it. I have known enough endings to fear beginnings. I have watched time take people, take chances, take whole versions of myself I never got to become. Still, there you were, not real yet, but possible. And possibility can be a dangerous light. It made me see the chair across from mine differently. It made the empty side of the bed feel less like a sentence and more like a question. It made me wonder whether God or fate or whatever name we give to the hand moving underneath our lives had not forgotten me completely. I am not young in the way I once was. My body knows the weather now. My hands remember what they have held and what they failed to hold. There are mornings when the mirror gives me back not a hero, not an idea, but just a man with time behind him and less of it ahead. But I still imagine opening a door and finding you there, Flau. I imagine not performing strength. I imagine telling you the truth before it turns into another silence. I imagine a small table, 2 plates, winter light, your breath near mine, and maybe the kind of laughter that arrives carefully, like a bird returning to a tree after a storm. I do not know if that future will come. I only know that the night something broke, it did not feel like an ending. I made coffee and watched steam lift from the cup, thin and pale, like breath leaving a body in winter. The apartment was too clean, too still, too obedient to my habits. No scarf over a chair, no second glass by the sink, no trace of someone interrupting the careful order I had mistaken for peace. I stood barefoot on the cold floor and listened for a sound that was not there. That absence had become so familiar, I almost loved it. The way prisoners sometimes touch the walls that keep them from the weather and call them protection. I thought about the years I had given away without noticing. Not wasted, exactly, because work had carried me when grief might have drowned me, and strangers had offered kindness, in ways I still carry. But there is another kind of losing that happens quietly while people applaud. You miss birthdays because the road needs you. You forget how to belong because every city is temporary. You keep moving because stopping would require you to feel the chair beside you, empty and patient, waiting like a question no one has dared to ask out loud. I wonder whether you would have been angry with me then. Not cruelly angry, but hurt in the way a woman becomes hurt when she sees a man abandoning responsibility. Maybe you would have stood in that kitchen doorway and said nothing at first. Maybe your silence would have been sharper than accusation. I can imagine your eyes taking in the single cup, the unopened mail, the coat still hanging where I dropped it 2 nights before, and I can almost hear you asking why I believed endurance was the same thing as living. By midday, I walked through the city with my collar raised against the wind, and every window seemed to hold a life I had not chosen. A woman's placing flowers into a vase. An older man tying a child's shoe. 2 hands. A meeting across a restaurant table. Not dramatically, just naturally, as if touch were allowed to be simple. I used to look away from such things quickly. That day I did not. I let them wound me. I let them show me what I had protected myself from, and the truth came slowly, with no mercy. I had not merely lost people. I had begun using loss as permission not to be found again. That was the admission I had avoided, the locked room beneath all the other rooms. I had told myself that love was dangerous because it could leave, but beneath that, there was something more difficult to confess. I was afraid that if someone truly stayed, she might discover there was less of me than the world believed. Less courage, less wisdom, less light, just a tired man with careful manners, old ghosts, and hands unsure where to rest. After that thought, the day changed color. The sky lowered, and the city noise seemed far away, as though I were hearing it from underwater. I stopped near a church I had passed many times, but never entered. The doors were open, and warm air moved from inside with the smell of wax and old wood. I did not go in. I stood there like a man, at the edge of his own forgiveness, unable to step forward, unable to turn back. I thought of God then, not as answer, but as presence, waiting without impatience. And I thought of you again, differently this time, not as rescue. That would be unfair to you, and I am old enough to know love cannot be a hospital where one person is always bleeding and the other is always bandaging. I thought of you as someone who might sit beside me in that unfinished place, not frightened by the cracks, not eager to fix them, simply willing to breathe there with me. I imagine telling you that I was scared, and instead of leaving, you might reach for my hand before I finished the sentence. But even that imagination frightened me, because once a man sees a future, he can no longer pretend the present is harmless. I walked home slower than usual, carrying the weight of a life that had served me and starved me. The evening settled blue over the street. In one lit window, a family moved around a tumble, passing plates, leaning into each other's voices. I pictured you there with me someday, not as fantasies, but as a fragile possibility. Your shoulder near mine, laughter softening the room, my name spoken by you without distance or demand. I cannot tell you that I was ready. I only know I no longer wanted to die as a story other people finished for me. I wanted one person to know the parts that never made it into interviews, photographs, or praise. I wanted to be seen while making tea, while forgetting where I put my glasses, while standing wordless at a window because memory had returned without warning. The night came down, and somewhere beyond it, I felt the faint pull of a road I had not yet taken, waiting for your footsteps beside mine. The collapse came when I realized a future wife was not a dream, but a mirror I could no longer avoid. My name is Keanu. And that morning I felt almost ashamed of how much I wanted to be chosen. There was a tremor in my voice, though no one heard it, because I was alone again, folding a shirt beside an untouched bed. You, the woman I am speaking to across all this distance, deserve to know why that small ache frightened me. I am telling you because the life behind my face finally began to fall apart quietly. It did not happen in public. There was no ambulance, no headline, no friend breaking down the door with urgent hands. Simply stood in the middle of a room I had paid for and could not feel at home inside. Curtains were half open, letting in a gray slice of morning, and dust moved through it slowly, as if time itself had grown tired. I remember hearing a truck pass below, then the faint clink of pipes behind the wall. Ordinary sounds became accusations. They said, "Look at this life. Look at everything you have kept clean, controlled, and empty." I had meetings that day, calls to return, people expecting the version of me that arrived on time and carried his sadness neatly. I tried to put myself together the way men do when they have learned to be useful before honest. Shoes first, jacket, keys, practiced breath, but my hand stopped on the doorknob. I could not open it, not because I was weak, though maybe I was, but because outside that door lived the same day I had been repeating for years. And suddenly, my soul refused to follow me there. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, and I do not know how long I stayed that way. The wood was cold through my shirt. My knees hurt. I watched light crawl across the room and thought of every time someone had asked whether I was all right, and I had given them a gentle lie. I had become kind in order to hide, generous in order to stay untouched, quiet in order to avoid needing anything. It is possible to be loved by many people and still arrange your life so no one can reach you. After that admission, the room felt different. Not kinder, but more truthful. It thickened around me. And in it, I heard names I rarely say, faces I carry like folded letters in an inner pocket. Loss has a smell. Did you know that? It smells like rain in a hallway, like hospital soap, like flowers beginning to darken in a vase. I breathed it in until my chest hurt. For a moment, I was not the man people recognized. I was just someone who had survived by leaving pieces of himself beside graves, stages, airports, and unanswered telephones. I wanted to call someone, but I did not know who could hear what I needed to say. Some words are heavy for friendly ears, too naked for polite concern. I imagined calling you, though I had no number, no name, no proof that life had even written you into my remaining pages. I imagined your voice arriving without hurry. Maybe you would not ask me to explain at once. Maybe you would let the silence sit between us until it stopped being a wall and became a table where both of us could place our tired hands. Then fear came in, as it always does, wearing the clothes of wisdom. It told me I was too late. It told me a woman who knew peace would not choose a man carrying weather in his bones. It told me tenderness belongs to younger mornings, to people who still believe time is generous. I almost listened. I almost stood up, opened the door, and returned to the old arrangement. Work as shelter, kindness as distance, Solitude as proof I needed no one. But somewhere inside the collapse, a smaller voice remained, and it did not sound afraid. It said that maybe love at this age would not look like rescue or fire or the hungry certainty people sing about when they are still untouched by years. Maybe it would look like two chairs near a window, your book open on your lap, my hand rests close enough that you could take it without ceremony. Maybe it would be soup on a cold night, a shared scarf in wind, a laugh that surprises us because sorrow had not been invited and came anyway, only to find there was no room left for it to rule us. The ache became a road the day I admitted I was searching for you. My name is Keanu. And saying that into the quiet felt like leaving a note beside my own heart. I was embarrassed by the need in my voice, even though only the morning heard it. You, the woman I keep addressing without proof, must know this was not romance as people imagine it. It was lonelier, older, closer to prayer. I am telling you because after the collapse, I could no longer pretend that stillness was peace or that waiting without hope was a life. I began walking more after that, not for health, not for discipline, but because rooms had started answering me too. Honestly, the streets held less judgment than walls. Wind moved through avenues with a cold patience, touching my face like someone checking whether I was still alive. I passed cafes where cups rang against saucers, laundromats warm with spinning clothes, parks where old leaves gathered at benches like letters never mailed. Everywhere I went, I looked for no one and looked for you. That was the contradiction I carried, hands in my pockets, eyes lowered, heart embarrassingly awake beneath my coat. Sometimes I thought I recognized you in strangers. Women standing before pairs at a market, choosing slowly, as if ripeness were a secret worth respecting. A woman crossing a street with gray light in her hair, not hurrying, not performing anything for the world. A woman laughing once into her scarf, and then looking down as though laughter had surprised even her. Each time, shame followed me. Who was I to place my longing on the shoulders of women passing through their own lives? Yet the heart, when deprived too long, begins listening for echoes everywhere. I returned often to the church whose doorway had stopped me before. At first, I only stood outside like a man unsure whether forgiveness had closing hours. Then one afternoon, rain began, fine and cold, and I stepped in because there was nowhere else to go without lying to myself. The air smelled of wax, stone, and old hands. A few candles trembled near the front. I sat in the last pew and did not pray with words. I only breathed. For once, the silence did not feel empty. It felt occupied by something merciful and impossibly patient nearby. That was where I understood in the truth I had avoided. I was not only searching for you, I was searching for the version of myself who could meet you without hiding. Until then, I had imagined love arriving as a door opening from the outside. But sitting there with rain ticking softly against the stained glass, I saw that perhaps I had to open something first. Not grandly, not with speeches, just enough to let another person find me alive inside my own life. That thought frightened me more than loneliness, because loneliness had become familiar, almost obedient. Ooh, do not misunderstand me. Ooze. I was not building fantasies to escape my life. I had escaped enough. What I wanted, what frightened me, was the ordinary weight of belonging. Your coat near mine, your tired voice saying my name when the day had been too much. My hand at your back in a crowded room, not to claim you, but to remind us both we had found each other. I imagined growing older beside you, slower, humbler, more grateful than I had known how to be. But I refuse to call it destiny yet. Some words need time. So I kept walking through rain, through pale mornings, through evenings that smelled of smoke and wet pavement. I kept searching without wanting to steal God's pen from his hand. I kept speaking to you in my mind, ashamed and relieved, as if each unspoken sentence were laying one plank across a dark river. Maybe you were nowhere near me. Maybe you were closer than breath. I did not know. But the road no longer felt like punishment. It felt like it was carrying me quietly toward a door I had not reached, where your shadow waited. The truth found me in a stranger's face, and for a moment I thought it was yours. My name is Keanu, though that morning the name felt borrowed, like a coat left on the wrong chair. I felt foolish for how quickly my heart moved, foolish for wanting recognition from eyes that had never promised me anything. You might keep speaking to through years and weather need to hear this carefully. I am telling you because truth does not always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it enters quietly, carrying groceries, and leaves a man unable to breathe for a while afterward. I was in a small market near the edge of a neighborhood where nobody expected anything from me. The lights were too white. The floor smelled faintly of rain and oranges, and outside the glass doors, traffic moved with its usual impatience. I had gone there for bread, apples, and something to do with my hands. Besides, hold the emptiness. Then I saw her near the flowers, choosing between two bunches of lilies. She tilted her head slightly, considering them with such tenderness that I stopped. It was not beauty that stunned me. It was the care she gave to choosing. For one unreasonable second, I believed life had finally placed you there. Not announced, not shining, not wrapped in miracle, but simply present beside a bucket of white flowers while music played softly above the aisles. My chest tightened. I nearly spoke. I nearly said something absurd, something exposed, something no careful man would say to a woman he did not know. Then she turned, and I saw she was not you. Of course, she was not you. She belonged entirely to her own life, and I was only a passerby. Suddenly ashamed of the story I had placed upon her, I bought what I needed and left too quickly. The wind outside was sharp enough to make my eyes water, which was convenient because for once I did not want to explain the wetness there. I stood near a parked car with a paper bag against my chest and laughed once quietly at myself. There I was, a grown man, an aging man, frightened by flowers and a face that carried no message for him. Yet beneath the embarrassment was something deeper, almost holy. I had mistaken a stranger for you because something in me had become awake enough to hope. That was the truth I encountered, though I tried to reduce it to fatigue, weather, imagination, anything less dangerous than longing. I walked home holding the bag in both arms, as if the apples inside were fragile relics. The city seemed changed, though I knew it was only me. Windows held warmer light. Voices from passing cars sounded less distant. Even the cold felt purposeful. And I realized I had spent so long myself guarding against disappointment that I had forgotten hope is not the opposite of pain. Sometimes hope is the form pain takes when it is still willing to live. Halfway home, I stopped under an awning while rain began tapping the streets in silver marks. I admitted something I had avoided since the first night I spoke to you in my mind. I did not only want to be loved, I wanted to be worthy of being stayed with. That difference broke me open. Love in dreams can be received without cost. Staying requires the daily truth. It asks whether I can be irritable, tired, afraid, ordinary, and still not disappear. It asks whether I can hear your hurt without making it about my old wounds first. The thought followed me into the apartment where the rooms waited with their usual patience. I placed the bread on the table, set the apples in a bowl, and stood there while rain blurred the window. I pictured you entering after me, shaking water from your coat, smiling with that tired softness people have when they have survived a long day and still choose gentleness. Then the image shifted. You were not smiling. You were asking me why I had gone silent again. You were waiting for an answer. And I saw that truth would not only comfort us, it would demand us. I had spent years imagining love as warmth, but truth showed me its colder mercy. It would ask me not to hide in kindness, not to use patience as distance, not to turn pain into nobility before you had a chance to touch it. I imagined us at a table during some future winter, 2 cups between us, your hand close but not reaching yet. Maybe I would have failed you in some small human way. Maybe you would be disappointed. And maybe destiny would depend not on grand promises, but on whether I could remain seated and speak. That possibility frightened me more than being alone. Alone, no one sees where you bend. Alone, no one hears the sentence you cannot finish. Alone, grief can keep its own hours, wandering the rooms without being asked its name. But with you, if you ever come, I would have to let another soul witness the unfinished places. I would have to trust that your love would not vanish when my silence became clumsy, when my past entered the room uninvited, when age made me slower, when the man beneath the myth needed help finding his way back to morning. So I washed one apple and ate it standing by the sink. Tasting rain on the skin, though it was only water from my hands. The apartment was quiet, but no longer empty in the same way. Somewhere, truth had entered and left its coat over a chair. Not know your name. I did not know whether you were walking through your own storm, or lighting a lamp, or praying without words. I only knew that if I ever found you, flowers would not be enough. I would have to bring my whole life, trembling and uncovered. I dressed slowly and sat on the edge of the bed, with one shoe untied, remembering my father in fragments, my mother's voice in kitchens, the faces of friends whose absence still entered without knocking. Memory does not come in order at my age. It arrives as temperature, as smell from a hallway, as sunlight touching a sleeve. I saw myself leaving rooms soon. Conversation with a smile, turning grief into distance before anyone could offer a chair. It is hard to admit this to you, but I had confused survival with character for nearly a lifetime. That was a turn in me, the place where recounting became confession. I had been speaking about loneliness as though it were weather, something that happened around me. But loneliness had also been my own construction. I built it carefully from caution, reputation, old pain, and the strange comfort of never having to disappoint anyone up close. If you were here, I think I would have lowered my head before saying that. I would have needed a long silence. I would have watched your hands, afraid they might fold away from me, and afraid they might reach forward with forgiveness. In the afternoon, I opened a box I had not touched for years. There were photographs, letters, small objects that meant nothing to anyone else, and therefore almost everything to me. A ticket stub, a worn notebook, a silver key with no door left to open. I sat on the floor, surrounded by proof that I had lived and still felt uncertain that I had let life live through me. Outside, children shouted somewhere down the street, their voices bright against the cooling air. I wondered what our home might sound like if our years were granted mercy one day. I imagined you moving through that home not as an ornament to my longing, but as a person with your own weather, your own locked rooms, your own old songs that hurt when they return. Maybe you would have lost things too. Maybe you would know how hope can feel indecent after certain griefs, like laughing near a grave. I pictured us learning each other cautious, not rushing toward vows, because the world enjoys a beautiful ending, but standing the counter while rain worried the windows, telling the truth in portions small enough for the heart to hold safely. Still, I feared what you would see when the myth fell asleep. Fame is a bright room with no bed in it. People can admire a figure and never ask whether the man inside has eaten, rested, forgiven himself, or wept properly. I had become accustomed to being interpreted from a distance. With you, distant would not be enough. You might notice the way I go quiet when happiness comes too close. You might hear the old door close in my voice. You might touch my shoulder, and I might flinch from tenderness before remembering it was not danger anymore. That evening, I wrote your name as a blank line on a page. I could not fill it, so I sat with the emptiness and let it accuse me gently. The lamp made a small circle of amber on the desk. Beyond it, the room faded into shadow, and I understood that this how I had lived. keeping one circle lit while refusing to look at the dark around it. I wanted to promise you courage, but promises made in solitude can become decorations. What mattered was whether I could practice courage before your face gave me a reason. So I began with small rebellions against myself. I answered a message honestly instead of beautifully. I told a friend I was tired and did not decorate it with humor. I left the dishes until morning and discovered nothing terrible happened. I stood before the window as night gathered and said aloud that I wanted to be loved, not by the world, but by one woman who would know the sound of my steps and the pauses between my sentences. Saying it did not make it certain. It only made denial impossible. And possibility can be a strange beginning, too. Before sleep, I imagined you someday filling that page with the empty line. I imagined your finger resting where your name should be, your breathing changed by the knowledge that I had been making room find you. I wanted you to smile to find. I feared you might cry. I feared more that you might close the book and decide I had waited too long to become honest. But the room was quiet, and beneath the quiet, something moved. The blank line remained on the page like a doorway. The dark had not finished opening. Hope flickered the first time I imagined you laughing in my kitchen, and it frightened me more than any grief had. My name is Keanu, and by then it sounded less like an introduction than a question I had carried too long. I felt exposed, standing there with morning light on my hands, because happiness had become a language I no longer spoke with confidence. You, woman whose name still waits beyond the edge of my knowing, must hear this part gently. I am telling you because something small and living began to move inside the ruins, and I did not trust it yet. It happened while I was making tea. The kettle breathed against the quiet, and the window above the sink held a pale sky, rinsed clean after rain. I had slept badly, but the apartment did not feel hostile when I entered it. That surprised me. The chair was still empty, the table still marked by old cups, the rooms still carrying the scent of wood, dust, and wet cloth, yet the emptiness had changed its posture. It was no longer standing guard against me. It was waiting almost shyly, as if it had been keeping a place for someone. I heard laughter then, not with my ears, but somewhere memories and prophecy touch. It was not loud. It was the kind of laugh a woman gives when she has tried to stay serious and failed. I turned toward the doorway before remembering I was alone. The ache that followed was different. It did not crush me, it opened me. For years, imagining a woman in my home had felt like trespassing against fate. But that morning, your absence had warmth around it. I stood there holding the cup, and for once, the future did not look entirely closed. I wanted to dismiss it. Men who have lived long enough become suspicious of tenderness that arrives without evidence. I told myself it was fatigue, weather, age, perhaps the mind offering comfort, because the body had grown tired of carrying sorrow. But the feeling stayed. It followed me through the day like a small light under a door. On the street, I noticed a father brushing crumbs from his daughter's coat. I noticed an old couple waiting for traffic, hands joined inside one glove. These things had wounded me before. That day, they still hurt, but they also called me. By afternoon, I found myself in a bookstore, though I had gone out only for air. The bell above the door made a soft sound, and warmth closed around me. Shelves leaned with used books, their pages smelling of dust, tobacco, rain, and other people's rooms. I touched the spine of a book on marriage and nearly laughed at my own foolishness. Then I did not laugh. I stood there with my hand on it, realizing I had spent years believing hope needed permission from circumstance, when perhaps hope was simply the soul practicing for what had not arrived. That was the admission I had avoided. I had not been afraid, only that love would leave. I had been afraid that a hopeless man can drift and call it acceptance. It's a hopeful man must prepare a place, must sweep the floor, must answer when life knocks, must risk looking foolish while 2 cups down, though only one pair of hands is present. I saw then that waiting for you could not mean remaining frozen. It had to mean becoming someone who would not make you pay for every wound I brought. I bought the book not because I believed pages could teach me how to love you, but because carrying it felt like carrying a confession. At home, I placed it on the table and did not open it. The cover rested beneath the lamp, ordinary and brave. Evening gathered at the windows. Somewhere a dog barked, then another answered, and the city settled into its thousand private lives. I imagined you seeing the book there and raising an eyebrow, amused but tender. I imagined saying I was trying and feeling ashamed of how much that small sentence would reveal. Still, Hope did not make me certain. It made me more careful. I began to see how easily longing can become selfish if it is not humbled. I did not want to invent you so completely that the real woman, when she came, would have no room to breathe. You may not laugh the way I imagined. You may not like tea. You may carry sorrows that ask more patience from me than I know I possess. You may arrive with questions I cannot answer cleanly. If you become real, I must let you be more than my rescue. That night, I made dinner and set one plate down, then paused before taking the second from the cupboard. My hand hovered there, foolish and trembling. I did not set the second place. I was learning that hope, like prayer, does not need to prove itself by performing. Instead, I left the cupboard open for a moment, looking at the stacked plates, imagining your hand reaching past mine someday, our shoulders touching in that ordinary domestic way that seems small until a man has lived too long without it. I closed the door quietly afterward. Before sleep, I sat by the window and watched one star appear above the roofs, faint but stubborn. I thought of you under some other ceiling, perhaps tired, perhaps unaware, that a man somewhere had begun making peace with the possibility of being loved. I imagined a future where you might sit beside me there, your thin eyes mine, both of us older than our first dreams, but not too old for mercy. I wanted to reach toward that vision, but I held back because some lights must be followed slowly. The star stayed, trembling over the dark, refusing to disappear. Destiny seemed possible the evening I stopped calling you imaginary. My name is Keanu, and I stood in the doorway of my apartment holding a small paper bag of groceries, feeling like a man caught between a life he knew and a life that had begun breathing somewhere ahead. The thought embarrassed me. It made my chest feel too open, my age too visible, my loneliness too plain. You, woman I still cannot name, were no longer only a wish I whispered toward darkness. I need to tell you why that frightened me, because possibility can ask more than despair ever dared. I had taken the long way home, past the park where the winter trees stood black up against the lowering sky. Children were leaving with their parents, dragging bright gloves through mud, arguing over nothing, laughing as if the world had not yet taught them how quickly things can be taken. I watched one little girl run back to her mother because she had forgotten a red scarf on a bench. The mother knelt, tied it around her gently, and kissed her forehead. I felt the old ache rise, but beneath it, Something else stirred something almost like permission to imagine belonging without stealing from anyone. At home, I unpacked the groceries slowly, placing each thing on the counter as though order might keep me steady. Bread, pears, rice, a small jar of honey I had bought for no reason except that it caught the light. I thought of you tasting it from a spoon, closing your eyes for 1 second, smiling because sweetness had surprised you. The image was so simple that it nearly undid me. I gripped the counter and breathed. For years, I had survived enormous sorrows. Yet this small imagined moment, honey, gratitude, your mouth softening, too dangerous to hold. I began to understand that destiny, if it was real, would not arrive as a trumpet or a sign written across the sky. It might come as room made ready before anyone entered, as a man buying honey because some hidden part of him had remembered sweetness could be shared. I carried the jar to the table and set it near the lamp. Outside, evening pressed its blue hands against the window. Inside, the apartment looked ordinary, but I sensed a quiet rearrangement, as different I'm expecting someone else's shadow to move gently across the floor. Then I admitted what I had been circling for months. I wanted life to choose me again. But I was afraid to choose life back. That was the turn, the place where hope stopped being soft and became demanding. It was easier to imagine you than to prepare for you. It was easier to speak to your absence than to become accountable to your presence. If you walked in with wet hair, tired eyes, and your own history folded carefully behind your smile, I could not remain a man preserved by longing. I would have to become available to love. That realization, Zay, followed me into the night. Sat at the table with the honey between my hands, remembering all the times I had mistakes, restraint for depth. Maybe I had seemed mysterious to some people, but often I was only afraid that need would make me less worthy, afraid that saying, "Stay," would sound childish from an aging man, afraid that if I reached for someone, the universe would notice and take her. I want you to know this before any promise leaves my mouth. I have not always been brave where tenderness was concerned, but I am trying. I imagined telling you that while rain moved along the glass, you might sit across from me, not rescuing me from the confession, not making it smaller than it is. Maybe you would look down at your hands first. Maybe you would say you were afraid too. And that possibility changed the room more than any fantasy of perfect love could have done. I had spent so long imagining myself as the one with wounds that I forgot you would arrive human, carrying losses, questions, disappointments, and perhaps one simple longing of your own: to be loved without having to disappear. The thought of your humanness made destiny feel less like fate and more like responsibility. I did not want to meet you as a man kneeling before an idea. I wanted to meet you standing, though perhaps unsteady, ready to learn the actual weather of your heart. I wondered whether we might one day argue softly in this room, then forgive each other before sleep. I wondered whether your family would become names I learned with care, whether some child's laughter might cross our doorway, whether Sunday's light could find us older, quieter, still reaching for the same cup. But I would not let the vision finish itself. I have learned that wanting too much too quickly can frighten the sacred away. So I left the future unfinished, like a letter folded before the last sentence. I washed the dishes. I turned off the kitchen light. I carried the honey jar back to the cupboard, then changed my mind and left it on the table, small and golden beneath the lamp. It seemed foolish, but I wanted one object in the room to bear witness that sweetness had been considered, that a place had been made, however trembling. Before bed, I opened the window, and cold air entered like an honest guest. The city below was dim, full of tires on wet pavement, distant voices, doors closing, lives continuing without asking my permission. I stood there and thought of you somewhere under the same dark, perhaps closer than reason allowed, perhaps still years away. I did not know whether destiny was or merely teaching me to stand differently. Yet the room no longer felt abandoned. On the table, the honey caught the last light and held it, as if dawn had left a message for us. The invitation, before invitation emerged, before I had the courage confession. And it shook me more than the first confession. My name is Keanu, just a man standing near the end of many roads with one door still unchosen. My voice feels unsteady here because asking life for you sounds almost selfish after so much has already been given and taken. But you, woman, I have carried as possibility through rooms, rain, and prayer. Need to hear why my silence began turning toward speech. There is a reason this part must be told before I dare reach outward to you. It began with a letter I did not send. I sat at the old wooden table, the jar of honey, the still catching morning light, and placed a blank page in front of me as if paper could become a threshold. Outside, wind combed the trees without tenderness. Inside, the apartment held its breath. I wrote, "Dear," then stopped because I did not know whether your name would someday be simple, familiar, and soft in my mouth, or whether it would remain one of those words destiny keeps behind its back until the heart is ready to be wounded open. For a long time, I only watched the ink dry around that unfinished greeting. It looked lonely, that single word waiting for another. I thought about every invitation I had failed to make in life, every hand I had not reached for because I feared the tremor would show. There were people who came near, moments that could have widened, doors that opened briefly and closed while I stood deciding whether I deserved to enter. I had called it patience. I had called it respect. Sometimes it was fear wearing good manners, and I feel the shame of that even now. I imagined you receiving such a letter someday, finding my words folded inside an envelope, perhaps beside flowers chosen slowly, perhaps beside nothing but the truth. Would you laugh at the old-fashionedness of it? Would you hold it near a window and read slowly, letting light move over the lines I had been afraid to speak? I did not want to ask for your life as though asking for shelter. I wanted to ask whether two unfinished souls might sit together a while and discover without hurry whether the quiet between them had been prepared by something merciful. That was when I admitted what I had avoided. An invitation is not only a door opened to another person, it is also a surrender of control. Once I ask, you are free to answer with yes, with no, with silence, with tears, with your own wounded history. I cannot direct your heart the way a scene can be directed. I cannot edit the pause before you speak. I cannot make myself younger, easier, untouched by grief. To invite you is to risk being seen wanting. And wanting has always made me feel poorest, where the world assumed I was rich. After that admission, the room changed. The table, the chair, the honey, the page, even the dust along the windowsill seemed to lean closer, as if waiting for me to continue. I wrote slowly then, not your name, but what I hoped my life might become if you entered it. I wrote about mornings, without performance, about walking beside you when my steps are slower, about learning the shape of your moods without trying to fix them. Wrote that I would listen badly at times because I am human, but I would return and listen again. I wrote about the fear too, because no real invitation should arrive dressed only in beauty. I told the page I was afraid of failing you in small ways, the kind that gather quietly. Forgetting to ask, retreating into thought, making grief sound like wisdom, mistaking silence for peace. I told it I was afraid you might stand close enough to feel how tired I am, then decide tenderness should not require such patience. Yet, even as I wrote this, I pictured your hand covering mine, not to erase the fear, but to let it know it was no longer alone. Toward evening, I folded the letter without finishing it. I did not send it because there was no address, and perhaps because some invitations must be lived before they are delivered. Still, I placed it in the drawer beside the page with your empty name, and the act felt like setting bread aside for a traveler. I could see a future trying to form at the edge of the room, your coat on the chair, your voice calling from the kitchen, a child visiting with muddy shoes, some holiday light trembling over our older faces. I let the vision breathe, then stopped. I refused to resolve it because resolution belongs to people who already know where love will land. I only knew that my life had begun facing outward. The road ahead was still dim, and I could not say whether you would come through a crowd, a conversation, a mistake, a prayer, answered late or not at all. But I had moved from longing into readiness, and readiness is a quiet kind of courage. It does not announce itself. It folds a letter, clears a chair, opens a window, and trusts that the wind may carry something home. That night, before sleep, I stood in the doorway and looked back at the room as though seeing it from your future eyes. It was not grand. It was not perfect. There were books stacked unevenly, a cup near the sink, shadows gathering corners, and one unfinished letter hidden in a drawer. But for the first time, the room seemed less like evidence of a man alone and more like a place waiting to become shared. Somewhere beyond the glass, the city breathed, and I felt the door inside me remain open, listening for the sound of your arrival. I am afraid you can hear the age in my breathing, the hesitation I have carried like an extra bone. You, woman, I have addressed through darkness without knowing your face, deserve the ending of this confession. There is a reason I have spoken so long and it is not to make you believe in romance. But in truth, I took the unfinished letter from the drawer before dawn. The apartment was cold, and the floor remembered winter through my socks. Outside, the city still slept under a thin blue darkness, while one truck moved somewhere far away, like a thought refusing to leave. I unfolded the page and saw the word "dear" waiting there. Patient, wounded, incomplete. Beside it lay the blank line where your name should have been. I touched that space with my finger and felt foolishly tender, as if paper could bruise, as if absence could lean closer when treated with enough care by me. For a long time, I did not write. I listened to the pipes, the window, my own uncertain breath. Then memories rose, not as a parade, but as weather returning to a familiar coast. I saw roads at night, motel lamps, hospital corridors, airport chairs, hands waving goodbye, voices I can no longer call back. I saw younger versions of myself stand at Threlf, smiling gently while leaving whole sentences unsaid. I wanted to forgive him, that man. I wanted to tell him he had done what he could. But forgiveness, like love, asks for honesty first from him. So I admitted the thing I had saved for last. I was not only afraid of dying unseen, I was afraid that if I were finally seen, I might have no more hiding place for all the grief I had made beautiful. People admired my quiet, but sometimes quiet was only fear with good posture. People praised my kindness, but sometimes kindness was distance wearing clean clothes. If you come into my life, I do not want to offer you a legend and keep the frightened man behind a locked door. I want to be found before I am gone. That truth changed the morning. First light entered slowly, touching the table, the honey jar, the folded letter, my hands. I wrote then, not perfectly, not bravely, but honestly. I wrote that I had loved the world from a distance because closeness had once cost too much. I wrote that I had mistaken endurance for peace. I wrote that I wanted a home where silence was not emptiness, where two tired people could sit near a window and let the day soften around them. I wrote that I was still learning how to stay and mean it. Halfway through the letter, I stopped and imagined you reading it. Not the woman made of my longing, but you, real and free, with your own disappointments, habits, prayers, and old wounds. Maybe you would put it down and walk to the window. Maybe you would laugh through tears because age has not made us safe, only honest. Maybe you would decide till my heart was too crowded with ghosts. I would have to accept that. An invitation is not a claim. It is a hand opened in the dark, prepared to remain empty if love requires it. Still, I pictured another ending, and I let myself stand near it without stealing its certainty. I saw you arriving on an ordinary afternoon, carrying rain on your coat and a softness in your eyes that made the room forget it had ever been alone. I saw us cooking badly, forgiving slowly, learning the sacred geography of each other's moods. I saw your hand finding mine at a table where bread cooled between us. I saw a family gathered sometimes, laughter spilling into corners, children or nieces or neighbors moving through with the careless brightness life lends to mercy. But I refuse to finish that future for us here. Some doors must remain unopened until footsteps reach them. I cannot say whether destiny will carry you to me or me to you, or whether this confession is only a prayer sent across us night that never answers clearly. I know only that I am no longer sealed. I have made a place inside myself where your truth could arrive without being forced to fit my dream. That is the smallest promise I can make, and perhaps the largest one left to a man learning love late. By evening, the letter was complete, though your name was still missing. I folded it carefully and placed it on the table instead of hiding it away. The room looked different, not because anything had changed, but because I had. There was still one cup by the sink, one coat by the door, one shadow resting beside the bed. Yet the loneliness no longer ruled like a king. It sat quietly, displaced by readiness. I opened the window, and warm air entered after days of cold, carrying the smell of rain, dust. So this is my invitation, not to the world, but to you. If these words ever find you, meet me first in truth, not fantasy. Do not love the image and leave the man unseen. Come as yourself, with your weather, your hesitation, your laughter, your scars, and let me come as I am, older, unfinished, but finally open. I cannot promise forever will be kind. I can only promise I will not hide from it with you. The letter remains on the table, and somewhere beyond the window, the road is waiting for your footsteps.